I've been thinking about this two-part episode for a while after watching it, and believe me when I say this, it could have been much more better if it took itself a little too seriously, but not over-the-top seriousness. Because as far as I'm concerned, when I say a little too serious, it's mainly the fact that this two-part episode is over-exaggerated. And I'm not talking about every single scene in this, I meant mainly Bernard's character and his midlife crisis. Now, I admit that midlife crises are topics that should be explored when it comes to characters like Bernard. I'm willing to admit that. Unfortunately, whenever I see the over-exaggeration when it comes to his character and how these two episodes are trying way too hard to take this whole Bernard staying at the creek a little too seriously, then as far as I'm concerned, those are literally one of the aspects onto why I haven't gotten into the show, despite some praising from here and there in some occasions. Believe me, this isn't mainly the fact that this show is going to be coming to an end, because as far as I'm concerned, the identity of itself just isn't something that I'm into. I will admit that there are people who are into the ideal. But keep in mind, as much as I try to understand the lore of Quake of the Creek, it's not always perfect, which is really saying something considering that, aside from Teen Titans Go and We Baby Bears, this is the only original Cartoon Network show that is happening at the moment. I may have not watched other Cartoon Network shows if I have missed any, but at the same time, it really shows of how much that this show is literally the last one alive, or the last one survived, due to what's been happening when it comes to Warner Brothers Discovery. But you pretty much know what all that is, and I don't want to repeat that, but I might bring it up later on in this review, so let's just go talk about the plot of these two episodes. After taking a complicated test at a class at the campus that he was mistakenly as a student in, this led to Bernard having some worries about his future, so he had this mindset on going with Quake to the creek. He starts to enjoy himself at the creek, but at the same time, he's starting to get way into it due to the midlife crisis that he's dealing with. To the point that he didn't meet Alexis at the airport while she was waiting for 3 hours, which is well that she needed space from him, which he took it really harshly. Believe me when I say over-exaggerating, I do mean that Bernard was over-exaggerating on the fact that he has been told that his girlfriend needed space from him. And to tell you the truth, how this scene is portrayed when it comes to Alexis's character, this is still over-exaggerating, which really says a lot onto how that these two episodes are really trying way too hard when it comes to Bernard's midlife crisis. In the next episode, Quake and his friends notice that Bernard is hanging out with Mark, who is the character that lost his friends in the beginning of this 4th season. And since that Bernard has been spending time at the creek mainly with Mark, who is showing him the life that he does at the creek, this leads to Quake doing all the chores in the house, which leads to a breaking point, and if he doesn't do the chores, he won't be able to go to the creek. This leads to an intervention with Bernard's friends along with Mark's ex-friends in order to talk some sense into him, but unfortunately it didn't work out. For the plots of these two-part episodes, I have to admit that the midlife crisis element would have been handled better if it wasn't over-exaggerated. Now, I understand that in part 2 it showcases that Bernard does the chores while Quake just goes to the creek not doing the chores, which I understand the irony of Quake calling out Bernard on going to the creek with the elderlies, well, not really elderlies, Mark, multiple times. However, it doesn't change the fact that the biggest problem that I have with these two episodes is Bernard's character when the midlife crisis just goes over the top. I understand that he was mistaken as a student in campus by taking a test that he had no idea what the answers are, while realizing that he only gets small fun time every now and then, which is what midlife crisis is all about. But the thing is, even if the Creek is supposed to be a place for children to enjoy themselves, I just find it difficult to believe that Bernard never spent his time at the Creek once or a few times to understand the feeling of what the Creek is like. Like, in the card game episode in season 1 or 2, it really feels like that he spent his time at the Creek by playing the card game. And just by seeing in the first part where he was playing the card game more legitimately, it actually made me convinced that he actually spent his time at the Creek. Like, if his spare time by hanging out with his friends may be the answer, but if it's mainly the fact that it was taking place outside of the Quake, then I honestly don't know what to think. I understand that the show is called Quake of the Creek for a reason that centers around Quakes and the other characters at the Creek at his age, mostly, but believe me, whenever I think about these problems when it comes to a 2-part episode discussing the midlife crisis centering around Bernard, then I really think that these 2 episodes should have been taking this midlife crisis seriously rather than over-exaggerating it. Maybe it's just me on the fact that I'm just not into the lore of the characters enjoying themselves at the Creek, but believe me, I really felt like that if they actually took the time to do a 2-part episode centering around Bernard's character, especially since that this is part of season 4 that have 40 episodes, I'm pretty sure that they would have done a lot more by giving Bernard more episodes to focus on his midlife crisis. Like, a 2-part episode is mostly rare to come across when it comes to shows like this, and when an episode is a full 22 minutes, it's mainly taking itself seriously. But since that these 2 episodes are called Bernard of the Creek Part 1 and Part 2 for a reason, and not just Bernard of the Creek by having the 2 episodes as a 22-minute episode, it really feels like that they didn't take this episode or this 2-part episode seriously. I need to talk about Alexis's character in these 2 episodes, despite appearing briefly in 2 episodes, despite contributing something towards the end. Even though that she is the nicest girlfriend in the world and she took the whole I need the space to herself a lot more calmly, since that she couldn't be able to understand what Bernard is dealing with after acting differently when it comes to the council meetings and other stuff. But believe me when I say this, she's just trying to be really ahead, and if we actually get to see her point of view mostly, with this having more episodes to focus on, then I think that this will have worked out. Believe me, people wanted to have an episode centering around Alexis, despite not being on the same ages as Quake and the other characters. And for the longest time, I understand that, but the biggest problem is that, like Bernard, these 2 characters don't get a lot of screen time, with the main focuses is centering around Quake and the other characters at the Creek. Because as far as I'm concerned, if the midlife crisis isn't taking itself seriously when it's being over-exaggerating when it comes to Bernard's character, then him changing his attitude and behavior when it comes to going to the Creek hanging out with Mark really makes it really hard for me to take his midlife crisis seriously. Believe me when I say this, I think that the biggest problem with this episode, or this show in general, is the fact that when it doesn't try to be mature enough, it just goes over exaggerating at most when it comes to the characters of Bernard and Alexis, since that they're older than the kid characters from the Creek. Look, this show doesn't need to be mature, since that Adventure Time took mature message seriously, despite with a few things that I do not agree on. But at the same time, for how over-exaggerating these 2 episodes are, all I can think of is, wouldn't kill the people at at the studio who have been working on the episodes focused more episodes on Bernard's midlife crisis rather than just these 2 episodes and bits in the campus episode, because as far as I'm concerned, despite what they're doing with when it comes to Warner Bros. Discovery, it just leaves these 2 episodes really unfinished, if you ask me. Because since we're supposed to look at this midlife crisis as a serious thing, and then it's getting over-exaggerated, then all I can think of is that what Craig is doing with, when it comes to him calling out Bernard on going to the creek, the irony of it when Bernard told Craig about that if he wants to go under a rock, since of how Craig is behaving, it just feels really, really off-putting. Like, it would have worked if it happened more days, which it did in the montage, but at the same time, for the over-exaggeration of the midlife crisis being thrown in, all I can think of is any of the teens and adults in this mature enough? Like, when people describe as immature as a problem to characters, the only thing I can think of is that Finn, the human, isn't the only one who was acting immature from Adventure Time when it comes to him manipulating Flame Princess. Because as far as I'm concerned, I'm not really on the board of him manipulating Flame Princess, knowing full well that it was phoned in due to random writing directions that just puts people in the dark, which those people are me. And the thing that puts these 2 episodes me in the dark is the fact that I'm pretty sure that there was a message before these 2-part episodes that focuses on Bernard being a lot more confident on his future, and even though what he's doing with involving college would be a huge turning point of his life, I'm just not convinced that Bernard isn't that smart. Like, I know full well that Bernard is intelligent enough to handle this, and even though that there were all traits that holds him back on being a character that can handle a future with a future wife, I still find it difficult to believe that Bernard will be in this scenario, because as far as I'm concerned for how he acts, it really feels so over the top that it just makes me more confused rather than taking his midlife crisis seriously. You know, guys, whenever I hear people say shows going into seasonal what in season 3 or 4, mainly 4, and with this being part of the 4th season, this episode, or this 2-part episode, really feels like seasonal what, since that it doesn't try to take itself seriously and just trying to be over-exaggerating as possible. Believe me when I say this show isn't into seasonal what since that it's in its 5th season, but keep in mind, it's been a full year since we got the information that the final episode of Craig of the Creek has been written. So as far as I'm concerned, that entire year, it's mainly the fact that the production of this show has been on hold due to Warner Bros. Discovery and the condition that Cartoon Network studios are in. As far as I'm concerned, this show really felt like the most luckiest show to come out on Survivor, on having a conclusion, but at the same time, it's not safe when it comes to production. Steven Universe dealt the same way, but the only difference is that it's mainly due to the Sapphire and Ruby wedding in season 5. That's literally the only difference is that it's mainly due to the LGBT situation, while in this it's mainly the Warner Bros. Discovery situation. As for the ending, it's not terrible, but it's not good either. It's heartwarming when it comes to Bernard and Alexis's relationship, but keep in mind, since that it doesn't excuse itself from being over-exaggerated, then I'm going to assume that they probably did what they could in order to make the ending of this episode work out. Since that it gave Bernard a change of heart on being with Alexis rather than being Mark. And to tell you the truth, when it comes to Mark's character, he's not one of the most interesting characters, mainly the fact that this is pretty much his final episode we're ever going to see him. I'm being honest with you that his closure when it comes to his friends' kind ties from him, they would have done a lot more with his character if they had more episodes to work with. But since that, the Warner Bros. Discovery got in the way, this is literally the best that they could come up with. I don't know if this is a last minute decision when it comes to his character in this episode, but at the same time, I'm starting to convince that there were a lot of last minute decisions when it comes to the second half of season 4 episodes. Believe me when I say this, when the Heart of the Forest takes up like half of season 5, I'm honestly convinced that Mark isn't going to be a main character, or at least a supporting antagonist character in the second half of season 5. Believe me, I'm pretty sure that this show is going to be focusing on the other characters, especially after a full year since the final episode has been written. While I can't say that this 2-part episode is terrible, it's on a Sunday and not on a Wednesday for a reason, but believe me when I say this, this show being one of the last original Cartoon Network shows at the moment, I'm gonna be really honest with you that with me stopping at this 2-part episode before getting to Heart of the Forest by the time of this recording, I think it really shows. I'm not saying that this show has gone downhill because I'm pretty sure it's going to have a good conclusion, but the reason why that this 2-part episode caught my attention in the first place is the fact that I think that it would have actually taken itself a little seriously if it's going to take a midlife crisis seriously and not over-exaggerate it. And after watching this 2-part episode, I really felt like that Craig of the Creek is really dealing with a midlife crisis when it comes to the production. Like, I know I need to watch Heart of the Forest in order to get my own perspective of it whenever I get the chance, but at the same time, I don't know. Even if it may happen right after the show comes to an end, the only thing I can think of is that I really feel bad for the show, despite not being a huge fan of it. For someone who watched this show for the first time at the end of 2020 while the pandemic was happening, and seeing the state that Cartoon Network is in, with this being one of the last running shows on Cartoon Network, Quake of the Creek had all the luck that it has, but it wasn't going to last forever. That's literally all I can say, centering around the predicament of the production of this show in general. With that being said, I'm giving this 2-part episode a 5.5 out of 10.